Hello and welcome to your award-winning Last Word on Spurs. We do hope you're keeping very, very safe and well. Thank you so much for joining it. We are back. It is book review time on Last Word on Spurs. We're bringing you a very, very special book review on this show. Tonight, alongside me, my co-host for this one, who's had the pleasure of reading the actual book itself, typing up the running order for this show as well. I'm delighted to have back alongside me, Jason McGovern's back. Jace, how are you, mate?
Not too bad, mate. And it was the usual challenge, not the colouring book that I'm used to, or the little ball books or the bath books, but no pictures in it either. That made it an even bigger challenge. But no, it was a thoroughly good read. Gave me a much better understanding of maybe how the next few months and years and such will go, and some great stuff in there. And any doubts in my mind about how we'll go when we hit rocky patches, as we're starting to get now, cleared up. I know what we're doing now. So fantastic read. Fantastic read.
Well, listen, it's an intriguing time to do it. I mean, I must say first, if you're listening to the show for the first time, you can find us on iTunes, we're on Spotify. We are across all social media. And of course, that'll be X, that'll be Instagram, that'll be Facebook too. We're joined by a very special guest, an author on this Last Word on Spurs, who wrote this fabulous book, Ange Postecoglou, the man, the methods, and the mastery, which Jason proudly holds up there for our watchers, viewers on YouTube. We're joined by author John Greechan on this Last Word on Spurs. John, lovely to have you join us. How are you first? Are you well?
Absolutely thrilled to be on the show. I've been loving my engagements with Spurs fans. Always a lively audience I've found in my years as a sports writer as well. And it's been really good fun because I think Ange and Spurs are a really good fit.
Well, listen, I think the great thing about the timing of this book, I've got to say, is for us, as we're obviously doing this with you during this international break, is that where we are right now, as you could argue, that Spurs are right in their first period of adversity under Ange. And I think what's going to be really, really intriguing is how essentially Spurs do come through it. So the great thing about this book, having you guys on the show here, is that I think this will give most certainly an insight into how Spurs are going to approach the coming games. And I know the one takeaway Jason told me upon reading the book is, Rick, he's not going to change his way. So I think for many, that'll be exciting. I mean, Jace, you've been on this with me from the very, very start. We've seen off a lot of different managers. But I think the one thing, Jason, what's important to say is that I know the brand of football that he plays most certainly relates to the way you love football being played, Jace. I think it's important for me to say that right from the start. We have to unmute Jace.
Sorry, Rick.
See what happens when you try to talk about positive football these days?
That's the thing, isn't it? I think for any fans, particularly when you go to the stadium, you pay your ticket prices. You know, you might travel hour and a half, 2 hours to get to a stadium, hour and a half, 2 hours home. You book your ticket 4 or 5 weeks in advance. You don't just want to go and win ugly and boring and sit there and watch one goal and then watch a team park a bus at home. So, you know, for me, it's always been a case of the day I leave that stadium, I want to feel like I can't wait to go back the next time. That's hugely important. And when we lost to 7-2 to Bayern Munich, I wanted to go back because it was a fantastic game. I'd seen an elite team. I'd seen Tottenham play well in the first half. Didn't want to see us concede 7, but I'd far sooner go back on that than a 1-0 win against Burnley in the 89th minute where Jose's parked a bus. So, for me, the style of football is massively important.
Absolutely. I think that's the one thing I can say most certainly this season. A lot of the fans have most certainly enjoyed is that brand of football. Because I think, look, if you look back at the last 3-4 years, the type of managers Tottenham have had, and that's disassociating what they've won, I think the brand of football has been more cautionary, more defensive, with the element of that. What we've missed is that attacking, vibrant football back at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. We have most certainly got that now. But I think the key is going to be, as we have touched upon in many shows recently, is due to the number of injuries Spurs do face at the moment. Can they sustain a style of play that is obviously in abundance with Ange Postecoglou and still get the results? And I can tell you most certainly, with having John here, it's going to be an intriguing time to know really how Spurs will come through that. But look, we're going to cover all that. We have got a quiz question for you as well, so you have to listen to the very, very end. You could be lucky enough to win a copy of this book. So listen out for the question at the end. That'll be delivered by Jason. But John, I am going to start with you. Firstly, tell us a little bit about yourself and where does your own interest in Ange Postecoglou come from and what triggered the writing of this book for you? This is the beauty when you decide to go live. I think John has frozen there for a second. We will try and get John back. It could be one of those nights. Hopefully it won't be. But John there, that's what it is. Talk about Ange. It leaves you absolutely starstruck. Do you know what? I think the one thing, as we allowed John, hopefully fingers crossed, to refresh the Wi-Fi and bring that back into play, Jace, is I wonder, Jace, for you personally, you know, having read the book and for the weeks that we've got coming up now, you've said already that you don't think the man's going to change. I think as John there, we allow him to sort out his Wi-Fi. Do you think Spurs, for the betterment, can still get results despite the number of injuries that we've got in store as things stand at the moment? I'm going to have to ask you to unmute again, Jace.
Yeah, I think we can. You know, Manchester City away is obviously going to be a tough one if you're missing players, but I still think we're good enough to win games of football. Newcastle have got plenty of problems of their own. Villa will be a tough game, but I'm certainly not sitting here raising a white flag thinking we got absolutely no chance of beating Aston Villa. So, you know, for me, that 11 that takes the pitch, there's still enough talented players on there. And what we do know is we have a fantastic goalkeeper that can keep us in games. And there are games of football where you just need one or two moments of real quality. And we know that Sonny can provide it. We know that Kulusevski can provide it. So if you come up with that quality and you keep it tight, you can still win games of football. And we should have won the Wolves game, let's be honest, even with the injuries. We went in at 90 minutes, 1-0 up. And that's a prime example. Okay, we didn't play particularly well, but there was no reason why we couldn't have held on and won that game. And
yep.
We won't be looking at a Tottenham team that's going to lose the next 7 games or something like that. I've no doubts about that. So it might be win one, draw one, lose one type of thing, but I'm still quite confident we'll get points. Just depends if Jermaine Defoe's transfer costs us 10 points.
Well, Joe, it's an interesting day, it has been. I go and we don't want the show to deviate too much away from obviously what we're here for. One thing I do want to ask you, Jace, that I mean, we'll get some kind of conclusive, you'd imagine, update from the Premier League on that. Where that stands in terms of the list for them, I don't know whether that comes before City, after City, before Chelsea, after Chelsea, before Newcastle, after Newcastle. But I just wondered that Wolves game. I think many would have looked at the fact that even at 1-1, could we have done more from a game management perspective there, or is that difficult? Where I don't know about you. I mean, I don't want it to be like a typical Spurs feeling that as soon as the first one went in, you had a horrible feeling another one could be following because we just looked like at that point, defensively wise, it was very, very difficult. I think we were, in some degrees, that game holding on, although many said that potentially we didn't play the Ange way in that game. Do you think game management wise, that's got to be looked at now in the next few games without the key players we've got?
Well, there was 2 ways for me to look at it. First of all, from the Ange ball part of it, I thought it was a brilliant loss for us to take from what he wants to put in the team, because his view would have been we've played a certain way for the first 11 games, we've got results, and as soon as we brought a couple of old players back, and that's not singling them out because they haven't been playing this season, but they came back maybe with that little bit of fear, maybe we dropped back to the old football. It was actually quite good that we lost the game doing that, because it enforces his opportunity to say, I told you, that's what happens when we play that way. So if we keep doing what I tell you to do, and the belief has gone that high through doing the good things, and as soon as you do go backwards, it falls apart, that just enforces your belief in what you should be doing. Whereas perhaps if we'd have held on for a 1-0 win there, 1 or 2 of those players go away thinking, there you go, kick the ball into the corner flags, that wastes time. And certainly enough, we've got 3 points, which isn't what he wants. So it's actually quite a good loss, to even the manner of the loss, losing it 2-1 right at the death rather than in the 64th minute and the 83rd minute type of thing. So I think it does help reinforce his beliefs. What I've said through reading that book, where I think we will have troubles this season, we will get caned a couple of times on a Chelsea-style scoreline, if you like. We'll ship 3 or 4 at a couple of games, and the balance of the game will be horrific. and we'll have to take that one on the chin. And when that happens, everyone's going to say, but you can't go toe-to-toe at Anfield, or you can't go toe-to-toe with Manchester City and then expect anything else. You've got to be pragmatic, and you've got to come up with a plan B. What I've learned from reading that book, whether we agree with it or not, Ange's plan B is to do plan A, but do plan A even better than you do it before. So that's his plan B. Make sure you keep doing what you're doing. And, you know, when people say you can't go toe-to-toe, I think John will explain it. You go to the Bernabeu as a Celtic side and you go toe-to-toe and you get beat 5-0, but he feels that you learn a lot more from doing that, and you become better through doing that than going back into this humble little shell trying to hang on, where then the messages of what you're trying to be as a football club get lost. And that's where the confusion comes. And in the long run, you're better to take that one on the chin. And I think that's what will happen with the Wolves game.
When you look at the upcoming games, you've got, Jace, the likes of Villa, City, Newcastle. You've said it already. You don't expect there to be a predominant change in the style. Do you go into the games with confidence, or do you go into those games with fear, given the, you know, pivotal injuries you've got? James Maddison, Mickey van der Ven. What's your honest feelings on those games?
I go into the Villa game with cautious optimism. City a week later, let's be fair, City away's never going to be easy. We went 2-0 up there, didn't we? Was it 2-0 up last year at half time? And actually our record at City's good. But don't look too much I am the old one game at a time. You could go to Manchester City in 2 weeks' time and find they've got 4 injuries. What happens if Haaland and Rodri are out injured? We just instantly look at it and don't think they're going to get anything. But that what happens. Haaland's got injured in this international break, hasn't he?
I think he has picked up a knock. Yes, indeed.
And then the Newcastle game, they've got big injury problems. I think they've got a Champions League game that they're going to have to get something from on the Wednesday or on the Tuesday on the Wednesday that week, I think, against Milan. Yep. So, you saw what happened with Newcastle at Bournemouth, where they came back and lost 1-0. So there's always that thing that things are a lot worse for you and everything's flying for who you're going to play. But you often find it's when it comes to that fixture, one or two things. I still look at it and think Porro's fit. Romero should be back for the Newcastle game, isn't it?
West Ham.
Newcastle game, or the West Ham game. Okay.
Yep.
Vicario's still there. Hopefully Bentancur's come into midfield, so it's not Højbjerg. There's still Son, Kulusevski, Brennan Johnson, who I'm excited to. There's still enough good players on the pitch. Yeah, there might not be much on the bench, but there's enough good players in that team to still get results, Rick. And like I say, our goalkeeper's been superb, and he's not shipping goals himself, is he? Other than the Chelsea game, so I'm still optimistic.
Yeah, I think that's got to be the key, isn't it? I think you look at the fact that, given, I think we were saying this for a long time, Jace, the importance, and I know you weren't even buying the fact of a title race or being even near that, because at the end of the day, title races, I think we all agree, don't start in 10, 11 games. They start after 25, 30 games. And ultimately, the key for Tottenham has always been, so far this season, to keep your predominantly 12, 13, 14 players fit. And I think, again, when you see the drop-off in comparison to from the 13, 14 starting players and then what the fringe players are, I think, again, it's evident for everybody to see. But I think we're all cautiously aware it wasn't all going to be done over one window. And I think that's the most important thing, right? That this is a long-term project and ultimately it's going to take its time, right, Jace?
Of course it will. It's, it's because Arteta finished 8th and 8th. Jurgen Klopp took that first whole season. Pep finished 3rd in his first season. People forget that. Finished 3rd in his first season, got beat by Leicester, got beat by Tottenham and things. And, Arteta's now, was he saying, like 120 games into his revolution, and we're 12. And that's it. When Arteta took over, they still had Ozil, they still had Aubameyang and players like that. It takes time. But the start that we've had, everyone gets so excited so quickly. But of course, there's going to be some rocky roads. And if you looked in those games, there was still enough in those games to suggest, the Man United game was a prime example. Manchester United were much better than Tottenham in that first half. Could have gone in at half time 2 or 3-0 up, and then it's a different story. The Liverpool game, they still scored 3 goals, because they had 2 disallowed, didn't they? I think that day. So they scored 3 goals against 10 men.
Yeah.
So that just shows you the problems that we could have. And, people, I love the excitement. I love that people are engaged. It's a brilliant atmosphere when you go. It was great for the Chelsea game to hear that belief in the bars before the game. But don't run before you can walk, and let's do our walking first.
Absolutely. Right. Talk about walking first. John, the good news is we have got you back with us. The bad news is
Can't see him.
We can't see you. So if John could hear us at all there, we will allow John a minute or so. We've got a padlock over the camera as things stand at the moment. So we are going to hopefully get John's visual in a second. And then hopefully, like I say, we can kickstart this show. I mean, they say Ange Ball. I think it's late ball the way it's going here. But, again, I think it's interesting you say that point, Jace, that essentially when you look at what Spurs have got to come, although they are without key players, I think you look at the fact that at the end of the day, what we've seen under Ange so far is that the players have found ways to win, right? I mean, that's the key. In games we haven't been great, we've found the ways to win, right? Absolutely.
And over a course of 38 games, other teams will get their problems, maybe at a different stage of the season and things like that.
Yep.
You always look in the here and now, and everything always seems terrible when you're in this predicament. But things change, and we'll have a good run, which we've had at the start of the season. Others have dropped points, and as the season progresses, it will switch again, and it will switch several ways. There'll be a game where you come up against new manager syndrome. There'll be a manager that's currently in the league doing well that will suddenly get sacked, and a game looks an entirely different proposition against Burnley when Vincent Kompany's sacked, or things like that. So much happens over 38 games that you can't look. You have to try and win one game 38 times, not win 38 games once.
Yeah,
and that's the key to it. So when you look at it and you say, what can we get from the next three, or you tweet out sometimes how many points from the next six, just get the first game, just the Villa game. Win the Villa game, you go to Man City with confidence. Lose the Villa game, not so much confidence. And it's just little things like that, little things that suddenly come up. Somebody that isn't particularly contributing at the moment, it's a worldie, goes straight in the back of the net, and you think, wow, right. And the next game, he's suddenly on and up, and Bentancur's back, and everything feels a lot better than it did at the start of the game. So many things can happen, Rick, that just Aston Villa is the only important game at the moment.
Yeah, I totally agree. Right, through somehow technology, we have got the wonderful John Greechan back with us. John, what a battle it's been, right? If anyone knew the background to how this show has tried to come together over this last week, right, it's been ridiculous.
I've had a PC, a laptop, and now on the iPhone. Let's hope this works.
We've gone through all three of them trying to make this work. I tell you what, we've battled to try and make this show work during this international break. Organisation, you guys better buy the book. Let me just tell you that. You better buy the book after this, I tell you. There's a good chance.
Is there a book? We'd forgotten all about it.
Is that the sacking of Postecoglou?
It will be by the time this bloody show
What
goes
a brilliant
out.
3 years it was. Those 2 European Cups were just fantastic. He's left us with great memories.
Wow, God! If that's what it's worth it, Jace, we'll take it now. We will take that. We'll move on already.
That cold wet Wednesday in Stoke when we went out the League Cup. I know you're still fed up.
Honestly, I'm still getting counselling for those cup exits. Don't put me through it. Right, John, we're going to start from the very, very top. Lovely to have you on the show. We'll try and get through the first question about any cut-offs now, if we can. John, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where does your own interest in this Ange Postecoglou book come from? And then additionally, what triggered you in the writing of this book?
Well, I've always resisted the idea of writing a book. I've been a sports writer for like 30 years, and I've always resisted the idea. And everyone I knew who'd written one had said, you've really got to be interested in the subject because it's a lot of words. And I got a phone call from a mate, Paul Smith at Berlin, who said, how about doing a book on Ange? And it literally took me half a heartbeat. I went, yep, that was it. Just really interesting. And what interested me about him was this wasn't some 35-year-old or 38-year-old who was just coming into management who was interesting. I knew he had a hinterland, he had a backstory, he had a fascinating family backstory, an immigrant story, and he'd come up the hard way. And I thought there's just got to be so many good elements and tales and stories to this, and I wasn't disappointed.
Look, I mean, again, it's fascinating when you look at the guy's backstory. He was born in the northern suburbs of Athens. And look, I think the key thing to start with here is, John, if you can tell us, what took Angelos Postecoglou to Melbourne at just the age of 5?
Well, his dad emigrated. His dad had already worked abroad in Lebanon at that point. I mean, things were pretty rough in Greece. I think this was about the time of they were just nationalising all the industries. I think it was maybe one of the military juntas that took over or something. There was a whole thing where the colonels took over and the generals took over. So there was a lot of things going on. He went, it's funny, if you ask Ange about it, he'll say, people always think immigrants moved across the world to have a better life. He said, my dad didn't have a better life. I don't think he would have had more, if he'd stayed at home, there'd have been hardships, but he'd have been with his family. But what he did was he moved to give, Ange and his sister a better life. So that was what it was about. It wasn't the first wave of Greek immigration to Melbourne. That had come a lot earlier, but there was a new wave of it. They arrived by boat, which was unusual in that jet age. But, and the way it was then, from being over there and speaking to the people, you got off the boat, you went to the local church, and you went to South Melbourne Hellas Football Club. And that's it. And you found yourself, a place to live, a place to work. And that's how it worked.
And his father was an incredibly hard-working man. But most of the time, though, that Ange spent with his father was based around football, and Ange just soaking everything up like a sponge.
Yeah. I mean, his dad just worked every hour that he could, and he battled against the odds, and in an alien environment with a different language. So he found that community there, which was helpful. It just became a thing. It's such a big thing. Everyone has this experience, I think, at some point. Fathers and sons in football, or grandfathers and grandsons in football. It's such a great thing when you can't talk about anything else. You can talk about that sometimes, eh? And this was his way of connecting with them. So for his dad, who was constantly exhausted, constantly just falling asleep at the dinner table, to take time out and spend, get him up in the middle of the night to watch a game, giving up precious sleep. Even at a young age, Ange knew how much that would have cost his dad in terms of energy, his life force, so much. But he also, when they went to these South Melbourne Hellas games, and everyone was talking Greek, and the food was Greek, and he said he just felt him like relax and breathe, and he loved seeing his dad in that environment as opposed to just being constantly striving and pressing and working the whole time.
And the coaching side of Ange was there at a really early age, where his first serious football at the age of 12, he was player coach of his school side.
Oh yeah, that's just amazing, isn't it? I mean, he's like, he petitioned the school to say, come on, we've got to have a soccer team, not footy, and they wore these hand-me-down AFL kit with the super tight shorts and the cut off shirts. And there was officially a teacher was supposed to be the coach, but I think the teacher just decided early on and was taking charge, and it was, yeah, fine, you do it, and I'll just sit and catch up on some marking or reading or have a beer or whatever it was. And just led them to the state championship.
Which highlights, doesn't it, his leadership qualities at such a young age.
Oh, mate, I spoke to people who met him when he was 7 and 8 years old at South Hellas, and they said even then he was organising. He was trying to tell the coaches what to do. 7 and 8 years old, he was getting things sorted. So he kind of just had that in him from the start.
Now, again, it's fair to say, even at a very early stage, John, he was absolutely obsessed with the tactical side of the game, and his dreams were more around coaching than playing, but also the style of football was even important to him at that age, right?
Yeah, it was about, his dad would point him towards the teams that he enjoyed watching. They would talk, they would all sit around, the old men would sit around, the dads would sit around after the Hellas games and talk about the tactics and where the coach was getting it wrong, what they wanted. And all the other kids would be out playing outside, and Ange would just sit and soak up this information as they used pepper pots and wine glasses or whatever it was to talk about the tactics. And occasionally his dad would turn around and say, come on, go out and play outside. And Ange wouldn't. And he thought his dad was secretly pleased that he didn't go out, play outside, that he wanted to be there and listen to the men and be part of that, absorbing it. English football was huge for him as well. I mean, if you go back 1970s Australia, that's what you got. You got your English football. You got match of the day. You got the big match. You got things on delay. So his dad would point him towards teams that played great football. Ange grew up a Liverpool fan, King Kenny still is hero in that team that passed the ball and moved the ball. He also had I think his dad also had an appreciation for a team like Leeds as well on that team, who were brilliant but could also mix it up as well. So there was all these influences on him at that time.
And of course, one of the big influences, which is a massive name in football, where he spent a lot of his early career, was with the Hungarian legend Ferenc Puskás, who became a massive influence on his visions of football and how he thought about the game and everything.
Yeah, when Puskás was appointed as South Melbourne manager, it gave Ange a few different insights. It gave him an insight into what absolute godlike celebrity was like, because you would talk about like people thrusting babies into the hands of the great man just to say that their child has been held by the great Ferenc Puskás. But it was brilliant. You speak to his teammates from that time and they'll say, you know, Ange was smart. He spoke Greek. Puskás had coached in Greece, obviously, and done very well there. So he had this shared language. And while everyone wanted to speak to Puskás, all the players wanted to sit next to him on the planes and they all wanted to chat to him. But they all wanted to ask about what was it like winning the European Cup? Who was the best player? You know, or they would talk. The Scottish boys would talk to him, and he would talk about Jimmy Johnson or something like that. But Ange was like asking questions in the way that Ange was asking questions, which was to find out things about why do you do this? Why would you do that? What if a team does this? Why would you do that? And he used to, you know, ferry him round. He was the captain, so he would ferry him round in his old battered car. And he learned loads from Puskás' attitude, his insight, his knowledge, his humility. It became a huge influence on him as well.
Now, interestingly, we're going back now, obviously, John, to really the start. You know, Ange's club, South Melbourne Hellas, won 4 National Soccer League titles during his time, twice as a player when he was a captain, and then as a coach, back-to-back titles before the league was restructured. So even early on, the man become accustomed to winning, right?
Yeah, he's if you go now to South Melbourne, you know, his picture's everywhere. You go to the clubhouse there, and he's on this. There's this great mural kind of painting of the team of the century, and he's in it at left back. And the current president likes to joke. Says, "I always tell him he didn't deserve to be in it at left back. He wasn't the best left back we had. He wasn't the best captain. He should have been the manager. You get picked by somebody else for the manager." But he says, you know, so but he's like, it's almost like they achieved things when he was there. And I noticed like last week, there's South Melbourne are back in a national league. They've been in this like regional Australian football with the A-League has gone mad. All the old clubs just kind of got chucked out. They had this real antipathy towards the old ethnic clubs. They got chucked out, and it was like, yeah, just go play in the Victorian Premier League. They're getting back into this second tier national league now. But as the chairman out there said to me, he says, you know, it had been 20 years since they played National League, but everyone still knew who South Melbourne was, and that was down to Ange Postecoglou. You know, he always talks about them. He always flies the flag for them.
Now, interestingly, I mean, at that time, John, cruciate injury ended his playing career at the age of 27, but soon took up the position of assistant coach at the football club. Maybe talk us through that period, because that must have been really difficult. I mean, the fact of, again, a cruciate injury, that obviously, as we see, does affect players that maybe never, ever return to become the same. I mean, look, we've got obviously Rodrigo Bentancur, related to the present day, just recovering from a cruciate, and look, the hope is, of course, he will recover to the fine player that he was beforehand. But what do you think this made Ange at that stage, you know, already consider the fact, look, want to go into coaching and straight in as assistant manager of the club?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking quite a long time ago as well. So the cruciate then was an absolute killer of an injury. You didn't really come back from it. A couple of his old teammates joked that the assistant had brought him back for pre-season training and said to him, if you can't beat the keeper in a race, you're going to become my assistant. And so if you'd have beaten the keeper, but I think that's a possibly apocryphal tale. He didn't know himself. You know, he felt he was slogging around with the reserves, kind of almost on one leg, and it really annoyed him that nobody had the balls to say to him, "Mate, you're finished. You're finished. You need to go into coaching." So he almost had to come to that conclusion himself. Going into coaching, big thing. You know, making that transition to guys who he was really, really friendly with. He'd been the captain, and guys talked about his ability as captain was brilliant. He would be able to be, as they put it, a yobble in the dressing room, and then talk a different way with Puskás, no, it's a different language, but talk a different way with a different manager, and then go and represent the club or the players in the boardroom and smarten himself up and go in and like represent things about, you know, funding or facilities or whatever it was. So he had this ability to move between these worlds. So I think he probably found that a little bit easier. But he had to make some decisions pretty early on if he was going into coaching that he's not going to be everyone's mate. He's not going to just be their pals.
And one of the key parts about the book, between all the chapters, there's a detail of certain matches that are massively key in his time. And there's a story in there that South Melbourne travelled to Sydney for a game. They lose 3-0. They're towards the bottom of the league at that time. And Ange has had enough on the bus on the way back to the airport. And he just walks down the front and pretty much lets rip at the players as who's the assistant manager. And that's really where the leadership starts to come. And then just a few days later, the owner of the club, having sacked the manager, visits Ange, who's working in a bank, I believe, at the time, and has to queue up to speak to Ange as if he's just an ordinary bank customer to take up the role. Yeah,
the incident on the bus. So I've heard the story from a couple of different people. I got it from someone who was actually on the bus there, so he was the general manager at the time. And he said, you know, it's just terrible atmosphere. He said, but players are kind of relaxed and kind of laughing on this 1 hour journey to go to the airport to fly home. And so, as Peter, who was the general manager at the time, telling me this, he's banging, you know, like the top of the table as he's telling me. So he's getting animated, reliving what happened. He says, and he just goes up the front. He's like, give me the microphone. Driver's like, what? Give me the microphone. And he gets up and it's the full, I've played for this club since I was 8 years old. I've never seen the jersey disgraced like this in anyone. You know, he's living, somebody laughs and he's like, you think it's funny? You'll be in the reserves next week. See how funny that is. Well, I've got nothing to do with it. And this is where the general manager goes, oh, okay. Ange's got something about him. They get back at midnight, 1 a.m, whatever it is. There's an emergency board meeting. They decide that the manager's going to get sacked. And the general manager goes in the next day and he queues up in the bank. Actually, what you in here, mate? Yeah, listen, we've got rid of the manager. We'd like you to take over in the interim. He says, and right away, and just like, okay, 6 or 7 p.m, team meeting, no excuses, everyone's got to be there. And he switched on right away, and he's got it. But even then, he's not being considered for the job on a permanent basis. He's nowhere in the running. He's just the caretaker. He's too young. He's too raw. This is South Melbourne, mate. This is like, you know, it was put to me by a guy down there. It's the Celtic of Australian football. They were this big traditional club. They weren't going to go for some rookie. And he had to do a bit of persuading there, even with people who liked him and thought he was great. They just hadn't occurred that he should be the manager. The rest is history.
I mean, again, when you look at that period, Johnny, he didn't try and make friends in the team. He criticised them for the position they were in. But, you know, maybe you would say crucially, he did win the remaining 3 games of that season, right?
Yeah, and then he had a tough start at the start of the next season. And this is a recurring theme. You know, tough start, and more than one person said to me that they go back to that same ground in Sydney, and it's like, if we lose there, he's gone. You know, he's gone. If we lose there, he's gone. But it's a late goal by one of his best mates. You know, a scrappy late goal. They win. He carries on, and then they start doing. He had that situation at Brisbane where he went on and set this ridiculous winning record. He's had it in Japan where there was like a bathhouse rebellion where players were approaching the translator saying, who the hell is this guy and what does he think he's doing? He knows nothing about Japanese football. He had a rough start at Celtic, and there's a game up at one of those, you talked about those key games, there's a game up at Aberdeen, and you're like, I'm not sure if he doesn't score that, if they don't score that late goal, does he under pressure then? Not sure if they knew he got sacked, but so it's happened at lots and lots of grounds, at lots of clubs. It kind of surprised me he made such a flying start at Spurs, to be honest. I just kind of expected he would go in and it would take this adaptation period. And the thing he says, he loves that period as well. He loves it when he can see, everything's going, it's going to click in a minute, and everyone else is doubting him. He loves that. He's like, this is brilliant. This is my favorite time. Maybe we've only won 2 games out of 6. And then, but he knows it's coming, and then they go off and take off. So yeah, he's had these, like, right from the start of his career, he's had to overcome these things.
That's why, Rick, just when we lost John, I mentioned the defeat at Wolves, I think is a really good defeat, and the whole manner of it, to have lost it late on, trying to hang on with players doing their old habits, and you say, that's your problem. It would have just emphasised that belief non-stop. And, I was going to say that even at South Melbourne, when he takes over there, the principles of, we'll call it Ange ball, but the type of football he wants to play became clear. But it's woe betide any player who doesn't follow that game plan. And if you're told you pass forward in the 85th minute when you're 1-0 up and you don't think of back passes and you go against his wishes, you're toast straight away, aren't you?
Yeah, he's got a great way with him as well, though. I spoke to people who played with him or played under him, and they said he had a great way of turning it around as well. If you're a defender who sold the jerseys with trying to play a pass forward in the 85th minute and you've lost the game, when it comes to the analysis session, he'll turn around to the striker and say, "Where the hell were you? Why weren't you making that run?" Because it's all interchangeable parts, obviously. I needed you to be doing this. He had no option there but to do that. Yeah, it's a bad pass, but you needed to give him an easier pass out. So he's really sharp with that. He's really sharp on. I keep coming back to this with people, and I kept trying to explain it when he took the job at Spurs, and I had loads of mates, Spurs fans down south, saying, "Yeah, but he'll change for the Premier League. He won't be able to do that in the Premier League." And I'm like, mate, this is not a gamble. It's not some flight of fancy. Every coach, right, is looking for that 51%, that little edge that they think is going to win them a game. Is going to win them consistently, win games. This is his way. He's done all the calculations. He's done all the philosophy. He's done all the hard work. And he's like, if we play like this, we've got a better chance of winning. And that's it. It's as simple as that. It's pragmatic almost. It's like, yeah, we could do it another way, but this is my way, and I think this is best. This is the way I know how to coach.
I think it's just as an aside, since reading the book and since doing the scripts things, we obviously saw the thing he did with BT or TNT or whatever, where he talked with Rio, and the way he said, "Don't play the clock." And we talk about game management. We'd all play the clock, don't we? We get to the last few minutes and say, right, now's the time, hold the ball, don't do anything silly, the game management thing. His thing is ignore the damn clock, because then you'll start doing things I don't want you to do in the first place. Keep going. And he really explained that through with Rio. And that was a fascinating part of that document, of the chat he did with Rio. Don't play to the clock. Ignore what's up there. Play the game.
Yeah, nothing changes for him in that respect. And I think he has to, his big thing is getting players to buy in. So he always says, if he suddenly turned around in a tough game and went, "Oh, guys, I don't fancy this today. Let's just play 5 in midfield and keep it tight." The first thing they would do is look at him and go, "Oh, so you don't believe all that other stuff?" And he's lost them. He's lost them like that. He has to be. If he wants them to be all in, he's got to be all in. And he is all in on it. And he's been all in on it almost since day one in football.
It's fascinating stuff. I mean, Jason, you say, the wins alone.
That's why I said to you, it's toe-to-toe at Manchester City. And if we get done by Haaland, we get done by Haaland. That's it. And it'd be no good people saying, "But you can't do that at Man City." Because we're going to do it. We're going to do it.
Yeah, I think what's, again, coming very much through is, and Jason, you've said this again, I mean, before we lost John, is that there is no plan B. It's just better being at plan A, right? You're just going to be a lot better at the plan A to begin with, right? That's the key.
Yeah, listen, it's not as simple as that sometimes, I suppose. He'll talk about, he plays 4-3-3, but he can play that 15 different ways depending on who he's got in his team. James Madison, you're just playing it slightly differently than when you do have James Madison, right? So, but he's got his principles, he's got his ideas. Jason, you'll know about the book, is one from Jerry Lee Lewis in the Great Balls of Fire biopic. If I'm going to hell, I'm going playing a piano. And I felt like it just sprung into my mind the more I spoke to people about him. You were like, yeah, he's just doing it. He's going his way, and he's going to do it his way. And he took, when he was at Celtic, we're going to Real Madrid. Yeah, fine. Let's take him on. And guess what? In the end, Luka Modric was pretty decent. So he kind of got in some space and did some damage. But it's like, how are you going to improve? We're going to go improve and go play 5-4-1. And just sit in and lose 1-0, and then we have to go back next year. He was still building for the long term, then go back next year and do it again, and then do it again. And where have you improved? You haven't improved. So he'll be looking at it. If they go to Man City and go to toe-to-toe and lose, that's fine, because when they play them again, they'll go better. And he'll be looking for next year. And if they don't win the title this year, he wants to go and win the title next year. He's not going to be like a guy that goes in, I think if we finish top 4, that's fine. He genuinely thinks he can be the best coach in the world. He genuinely thinks he can win any title, any trophy he goes in for.
Okay, it's fascinating stuff. And as we said, look, back-to-back titles in 98, 99 followed, and then victory in 99, Oceania Club Championship qualified for the inaugural FIFA World Cup Championship, which contained Manchester United. And older listeners and viewers will, of course, remember how they were given permission to withdraw from the FA Cup to participate in the event. Now, the South Melbourne were not, of course, fully professional, but they handled the tournament pretty well in the circumstances, including as well, John, that match against United at the time.
Yeah, I mean, before they get there, that Oceania Championship was magnificently barmy, like from the sublime to the ridiculous. In one of the games they played, there was a frog infestation on the pitch. So they're playing in Fiji or somewhere. So it's like this really two worlds. You're going from that era, turn of the millennium, oceanic football was still not anywhere near professional, to suddenly you're going there. And they had some interesting adventures there, getting showered with cups of urine by Vasco da Gama fans. Just like to suddenly into this mentalness. I was actually at that tournament covering it. I guarantee I would have interviewed Ange at some point, because I was doing the opposition beat effectively. I'd love to say, I remember being really impressed. I have no memory of it. That's just probably to do with my age. It just what there was so much going on. Man United, because they were out of the FA Cup, they were allowed to be out of the FA Cup. Beckham mania was mental at that point. It was just, I don't think we paid any attention to the opposition at all.
Postecoglou, after Melbourne, became coach of the Australian youth sides between 2001 2007. But then came a massive event in the story of Postecoglou, when he had a heated argument on television with the pundit Craig Foster after the young Socceroos had missed out on qualifying for those youth world championships. Yeah,
and that. For man, a few regrets, but that's probably a regret the way he handled that situation. He said he still probably annoys him the way he did it, and the way he got dragged into an argument. If you haven't seen it, it's remarkable. It's like Clough and Reevy, famously. It's like that, but even more visceral, I think, because they're really going at each other. And, I think it was a bit of inexperience. It was a bit of frustration of being kind of hung out to dry by Soccer Australia a little bit there. I think he enjoyed the job up to a point, but it wasn't really him. It wasn't really for him. He was dealing with a situation where young players weren't getting any exposure at game time, and then he was having to take them to tournaments, and it was just an ugly time. Him and Foster are now, if not bezies, they're certainly made amends, and they've got a lot of interest and views on things. So that they've made an break. I didn't open the book in the end, but we had a chat about it and a couple of exchanges back and forth, and him saying how pleased he was that Ange bounced back from that, and that wasn't the kind of cap on his career remembered for a fallout,
But for a manager that had already made a big impression, that interview did lasting damage for him for quite some time, didn't it? Within Australia, and club owners thought, here's a loose cannon we've got in our hands here.
Yeah, I mean, he couldn't. I mean, he went off and had this mad adventure in Greek 2nd or 3rd division football, which was exactly as you would imagine it. Exactly as mad as you would imagine that adventure. Everything you would think about it ended up true. He comes back and he was totally frozen out. He was doing his Fox Sports bit, and he was helping out here, and he went out to Nunawading FC to run their youth program. I went out there when I went down to Melbourne. You have to see it. Yeah, I think everyone probably has seen now that they've got the mural with Cruyff, Pep, and Ange on the wall at the clubhouse. But I think until you go out there and you see how small this club is, it's like a club here in South, a great grassroots club, and it felt just like that. You're just walking in this like grassroots club where they share the clubhouse or the pavilion with a rugby club, and like we do, and it's like And this was grassroots, and he was going there working with 10 and 11-year-olds, and just being so passionate about it, he was willing to do that. It's tucked in behind a scout hut. It's like this, to think of where he is now and where he'd been, to suddenly out doing that, but also bringing enthusiasm to it. The guy that runs Nuttallotting had played at a reasonable kind of National League level. He said the training he'd brought had stuff he'd never seen before, never imagined before. And he's got 10-year-olds playing out from the back and parents going mental because they're losing. And he's dealing with it because he's like, this is how we learn, this is how we play football. And Nuttallotting now, they're still very much a grassroots club and playing regional, but they produce players. They've had one go to Liverpool, they've had a couple of guys go here, there, and everywhere in the A-League. So, it's remarkable. And he was working the circuit, doing the media thing, and then the chance comes at Brisbane. And again, there were eyebrows raised. He went in, he cleared out a lot of players, a lot of really popular players, overseas players, Scottish players, English players, guys who were big stars, big characters, some of whom went into the media and promptly started being on the outside of the tent pissing in, which made life difficult. But then he just, Brisbane Roar Salona, as he called it. He was still in an A-League that was still dominated by a kind of an outdated version of the British style of football. It was 4-4-2, and it was like get the ball in the channels and go. And he just revolutionised it and says, we're going to play from the back, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And they just go and sweep everyone away.
As you say, in that first year at Brisbane, lots of big names disappeared. And it was a turbulent time. But that second season, it's their first A-League title. Brisbane Roar losing just once in the season and had a spell 36 games unbeaten. And he ends up winning his third and fourth national titles overall, which is still an Australian record, I believe. Yeah,
the success was remarkable. And the memories of players who worked there with him are remarkable. They just have great insight into what he was like I think this is when he was really hitting his stride. This was the rebirth of Ange when he gets in there and he's showing everyone what he can do. And his ability, his way of weaving a story and getting people involved in it, his use of analysis, he got really interested in it. And his management style. One thing that's really interesting about his management style, he keeps himself very separate. He's the boss. Everyone else works for him. And he says himself, he would have had a more interesting life if he'd have been one of the guys. And particularly even with his staff and spent the night before a game having a burger and a beer and you relaxing, unwinding. But he made this decision, this was the way he had to be. And that really came into play at Brisbane. Thomas Broik, who played with him there, was considered one of the A-League greats. And he said, you can't want this relationship. You want a relationship with your coach, but it was almost authoritarian. You knew he wanted the best for you. You knew he was totally invested in making you the best footballer you could be. But he wasn't your pal. Yeah, and that was just the way it worked for him.
It's really interesting you say that, John, because I think that's the one clear, distinct message from a lot of even the Spurs current players that we find is that there's this abiding respect from Postecoglou to them as people. But as you've said there in such an eloquent way, it's not about being pals. It is just about getting the best out of each individual. And it's a very specific skill to be able to do that, to be able to not attach yourself to a player, but then still have their best interest at heart. Because I think, Jace, if we cast our mind back to someone like Maurizio Pochettino, I think one of the things he struggled with towards the end was, I think, the fact that he was a lot of the players' friends.
Yeah.
And I think, to some degree, lost the coaching aspect, right?
Yeah, I think that's a fair criticism of Poch at the end, a little bit maybe too loyalty to certain players and things. And it did become a detriment. Maybe one or two problems that we saw further down the line with players he could have seen earlier if he had been a bit standoffish, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Listen, what we are going to do, we are going to go for our first break of this show for our listeners on audio. There's around 500, 600 of you around the world watching us now that are enthused by Ange Ball, when it's being brought to us exclusively by the wonderful author John Greechan, who is here to promote this brand new book that has only recently been released, I must add. That's Ange Postecoglou, The Man, The Methods and The Mastery. Jason has read this book. He's the man behind what we've got as the running order for this show. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got many watching us even in Los Angeles, I must say, even in the States. Thank you so much for staying up late early, wherever you are, different time zones in the world. I have to ask you one thing, John, and this is from Christina, one of our own panelists here on Last But on Spurs. She asked, has Ange read the book? And interesting to know, really, because again, have you had any real endorsement, whether you know Ange has known about the book or has any interaction with you at all?
Listen, it's weird because like when I not long finished, or maybe I was still in the process of finishing it, and I was in his company that thing. So, but we were together for like a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and it kind of felt weird to go, oh, by the way, I'm the guy writing the book about you, mate. So it was slightly weird and awkward, and he's not the most clubbable, chubbable type person on the earth. So I was a little bit worried. Listen, almost everyone I spoke to who was really close to him would say, I get in touch and they go, yeah, let me get back to you. And then 24 hours later, they'd come, yeah, no problem, mate. So he knew, it's clear he knew I was doing it, because they were going to him saying, this guy's doing a book. Should I talk to him? And he was like, yeah, mate, do what you like, whatever it was. I spoke to people that have known him since he was 7 and 8 years old.
Wow, okay.
Best friends and people like that. So, yeah, I don't know if he's read it or not. I had a cryptic message from a friend who said, has Ange been in touch yet? And I was like, no, why? And he went, oh, so nothing. And I'm like, oh crap, has he read it? Does he like it? I'm not sure. As a friend who would know these things.
Absolutely. Well, I think that it's a massive endorsement for the work the man is doing and why Jason, I must say, again, with managers in the past, I think, Jason, we've all had our concerns, but I think the fact is that whatever's going to happen, we're in for what Mr. Lee McQueen calls a crazy train, right, Jason?
The crazy train's going to be, he's very apt for what's going to happen, that's for sure.
Absolutely. We shall see. It's going to be interesting. It is. John, I'm going to steer back towards what we were discussing before that break. And look, I think brief stints in lower league Greece and Australia followed, but he got his big break again when he became the coach of the Brisbane Roar, as you've touched upon. And this really was the making of Postecoglou we know now. But he did, of course, handle his departure from Greece, we have to say, superbly at the time. Took us more through that period, John, of what it was like.
Yeah, there was a takeover. There was a new guy come in. Anyone who's ever covered anything about Greek football will know that there was some money being owed. That was a real shock. Lower division Greek football. There were guys were there. I can't think of how many players I've spoken to over the years who are like, I'm waiting to get my money before I leave. They just and it ended with him and his assistant just literally going to the airport with their pockets stuffed full of euros. They just made sure he got It wasn't quite like that. I like to imagine him frog marching the owner towards the bank and saying, give me the money and we're getting out of here, So, yeah, but I think he really enjoyed the time. Greece and the Greek diaspora is enormously important to him. You got to remember where he grew up. If you go down there, Melbourne, you go to Pran, it's still incredibly Greek suburb. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. You go through Pran Market, man, the food just makes your mouth water. It's fantastic. You go to South Melbourne games, and on game day, there's still some of the older fans are talking Greek in the clubhouse, and the chairman will be wandering around talking Greek to some of the older guys that are there. It's still like that. So he loved his time there. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up back there at some point in Greece. I think everyone's talked about the Greece national job at some point. He win a couple of Champions League Spurs, he'd probably get that.
I think we're allowing that.
You imagine him frog marching Daniel Levy down to Coots and Co. or something like that for his playoff. Just like Jermaine Defoe's agent obviously did.
Oh my God! Don't. I tell you what, are we liable? Allegedly, you must say. Over to you, Jace.
But the thing was at Brisbane Roar as well was a huge turnover of players, but a lot of the players that came in were players identified for their attitudes that they bring, the freshness of buying into his ideas rather than just ability. And it perhaps gave us that opportunity in the summer where we looked at the goalkeeper scenario, and it's since come out that, and we assume he's talking about Vicario, that he spoke to one player who just wanted to get out of one club, and he spoke to another player in the same position that was busting a gut to play for Tottenham. And despite taking the so-called cheaper option that fans have at the time accused us of, he said, that's my man. He'll buy in.
Yeah, it's so one of his old teammates is now like head of a global recruitment firm, right? So he spends
Lee McQueen.
he spends his life, his professional life, advising people on how to headhunt for talent. And he says he refers to Ange a lot. He literally will take things that Ange has spoken to him about and use that as a guide, because it can apply across any industry. And Ange said it, his character. He wants the character first. And I think he said it just quite recently again, doesn't he? If you're, he's got 10 targets for a position. 10 of them can do almost everything brilliantly, particularly if you're talking a Premier League club with the money you've got and the market you're shopping in now. So he's looking, well, what sets him apart? And he wants the character. He wants someone who fits in with the culture that he's got. You can't have someone who doesn't fit in with that culture.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I mean, again, during that period, as we said, I think Jason's alluded to it, that was an undertook of a huge rebuild in that first year. Several big name players. Second season, of course, the first back A-League titles. Rogers losing once in that season, going the 36 games unbeaten. Third and fourth national titles. An overall record in Australian football as well. I think it's fair to say, as we've touched upon during this show, look, Ange does like to rebuild teams, but he also enjoys the challenge off the pitch to really change the culture of a club. And I think it's fair to say, as we've alluded to in the show, coming into Tottenham at the time of the summer, we did need a massive culture reset and to take away non-believers in the ways on the journey. And we saw that with his stint with the Socceroos. If that change is resisted, he walks away, which he did after qualifying for the 2018 World Cup. I just wonder, John, from, again, the outside looking at that time, how big a shock that was for him to walk away, because that must be one of the most proudest jobs that he's had in football. But again, a real kind of, even at that age, a reminder that he's not afraid to make big decisions in his career, right?
Yeah, he's very clear on the time he has, the stage he has at his career. He knows. It's funny you talk about, like, he doesn't do game management, in games, but I think he's very aware of where his career is. Like when the Spurs job came up, then no way he was knocking that back from Celtic. And say, well, I'll stick around another year at Celtic. Same thing at Australia. You speak to the people there. He's always seemed to be at loggerheads with Soccer Australia at some degree or another. He thinks they get to a certain level and then the support isn't there. He's had issues with them in the past. He still is very much on the outside chipping in at them. We should be doing this better. We should be doing that better. He's a big fan of AFL and his cricket and stuff like that, but he hates the way soccer lags behind. He would love Bazball, right? He's got to be a Bazball fan. Come on, in the cricket. So he's national allegiances aside. But he seems to be. Yeah, I think it's a little bit constraining sometimes working for a national association as well, isn't it? And plus, I've dealt with enough Scotland managers over the years who just, even the successful ones, come on, make the joke. But it drives them barmy.
I was trying to think of one.
We've got one at the moment, Stevie Clark, starting army. But it drives them barmy because there's nothing to do when you're a national team coach. It is literally, I remember Walter Smith told him one day, so what you're doing? He says, watching Barney with the grandchildren, And it's like, they were just, they've got no time. So he wanted to be back in club football and doing things. The step to go to Japan was a surprise. And a particularly bold move by him when he went there, because he said, his language is his main weapon. Telling stories is the main weapon. How was he going to do without that? And yet he found a way.
It's fascinating stuff. It really is. And again, I mean, I think whilst with the national team, winning the 2015 Asian Cup, despite the Sonny 90-minute equaliser, which, for every opportunity there is where Sonny sits alongside him in a press conference, he will mostly bring that up on every occasion or every, as we've seen, fan forum. That equaliser was a huge highlight for him, wasn't it, John? It feels.
Yeah, that
the equaliser, winning it, despite
winning it.
Despite winning it, I must say, yeah, of course.
Yeah, winning it. The people that worked with him said that was his masterclass. That was his magnum opus as a coach. The way he managed that team and the way he had built everything. They played all these ridiculously difficult games, going away to build the team up and to build up the resilience. He'd got their sports science guys constantly dropping in reminders about how they were the fittest team and everything. So it wasn't like suddenly when extra time comes round, he's having to improvise. He goes up and he's got this all the work he's done and everything he's put in and meticulously planned, that he goes and delivers this speech to these guys that makes them go out and win it. Now, true to form, his dad Jim comes out at the end and says, well done, but if you'd have made this sub earlier, you wouldn't have lost the equaliser and you'd have won it in regulation time. And that was just that's the relationship he had with his dad, I think. And he appreciated that.
But so he leaves Australia, takes up a role at Yokohama. And he was, as you said there, he was instantly met by resistance by almost every single player, to the tactical style of the game, to the tempo that he wanted to play. And so the subsequent clearing of players who can't or just won't buy in again saw that first season at Yokohama really difficult. I think there was something like 25 players moved on within his first year, in a club that's almost relegated under that first season.
Yeah, and listen, he was lucky. He's in there with owners who understood, but there were people on the board, from what I gather, that were a little bit uncertain as well. Have we made a mistake with this guy? Because, here we go. He's only done it in Australia, and then he's only done it in Japan, then he's only done it in Scotland. That's the way his career has worked. But he goes in there and, speaking to one of the translators who worked with him out there, and he said, you'd look around. He says, I'm translating and trying to get every nuance of what he's saying, because it's not just word for word. Such a different language, Japanese. He says, and I'm looking at the players and there's nothing coming back.
It's a different culture as well.
Yeah. And he says, there's nothing coming back from these players. He says it's like apathy stroke hostility. They're just staring blank. And he can tell it's not getting through. And then players speak to the translator and say, listen, who the hell is this guy? What is going on here? What is this? And the translator hands up right away. The translator, who was a coach as well, who said, he would have done the job for nothing just to learn from Ange. He says, listen, you've got to stick with him. You've got to believe. He says, by halfway through the season, he says, maybe half of them are on board. But, Ange knew and he understood. It's like, if I can get these guys on board, these guys, I'm just going to have to get rid of. And he had supportive owners there who were like, well, we'll give you the funding. We'll give you the room to do this. And then, when he gets his guys in, though, it just works for him. It's clearly just worked for him in Japan. And then, that's another step up. And I think people even in Australia in the A-League would say that, that going and winning in Japan, the J-League, suddenly there's people beginning to take notice. I hate to mention Arsene Wenger on a Spurs podcast. Yeah, some guy, he did something in the J-League once. But you know what I mean? So it carries a certain cachet.
You could say Steve Perryman and Ozzy Ardiles did something in the Japanese league.
Yeah. Ozzy. I thought you'd draw a veil over Ozzy's time with Spurs.
But it's fascinating stuff. I mean, again, as Jason alluded to, there 25 players moved on, and in a year the club was being relegated. He won the title in the following season. Again, it's just fascinating. And again, it was indeed at Yokohama that his inverted fullback became a big part of his philosophy, and not, as Gary Neville suggests, by copying Pep. Right, John?
No. I mean, listen, coaches copy everyone, right? That's it. If you go on any coaching course, the first thing the instructors say to you is, see if you see anything you like from one of the other guys, nick it. Just nick it, right? Just you should take it. So that's going to happen. But he went to Japan, and he was finding the fullbacks were struggling with some aspects of what he wanted them to do, and getting wide, and the spaces between the fullbacks and the midfielders. And he thought, well, I'll tell you what, I'll just narrow the space between them. I'll bring them in. And then that started the idea. If I bring them in, then my number 8s can go beyond, and I can do that. Oh, I've got it. So he comes up with that there. He also develops a real love for and reliance on video analysis, because the language barrier is more difficult. And he gets really good at using video to show things to players, which is great. And he's aware that he's constantly has to modulate his message. He can't keep doing the same thing, delivering the same message, because what worked for him when he was 36 doesn't work when you're 56, because football's moved on, players have moved on, they look at things entirely differently. So yeah, but the Japanese experience, he brings these in. I know Jason, you want to speak about this 5-lane thing that he's done. That's a really common thing. It's one of the UEFA trends. If you go on, I do a few coaching courses and things, and we did one on last season's Champions League, and the 5-lane attack is just became a real dominant thing where you have a player. You imagine you've got 5 lanes up and down the pitch, and you have a player in each one of those lanes. It's as simple as that. The idea is to play with maximum width, and then within that, you've stretched the opposition. They can't cover everything, and then what Ange goes for is these final third entries in that area, just on the not on the full on the wing, kind of one lane in there, balls across, crash the 6-yard box. It's a goal, you know. And he just loves these things. He loves that. He loves that little space on the edge of the box. Most coaches probably would try and do the same thing. They're all doing it different ways. He just comes up with different ways to do it all the time.
Yeah,
we saw that at Luton, didn't we, when Richarlison skied it over the crossbar?
Yeah. Brilliant example. Brilliant. I think, look, it's interesting, John, that despite the huge resistance to his ways and the tactical plans upon his arrival, that he's now highly revered throughout Japanese football, and his methods have spread through the league and the national team. And being quite frank, it's totally changed Japanese football, right?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, his disciples are there all over the place in Japanese football. Now, you know, still spreading Ange ball, or their version of Ange ball. He left the lasting.
Actually, if you think about it, look how exciting they were in the World Cup. That game with the Germans and things like that. They play some terrific football in the World Cup, man. Because
he thinks that's the obvious way for them to play. He loved it when he was, you know, with Australia and playing against Japan or playing against Japanese clubs. If they played against them with Brisbane or whatever, he loved Japanese footballers. He thought they're so technical and so good at this. Why don't they do more of this? You're wasting your time doing anything else than this. I mean, he would probably say that about most teams in most games. He thinks you're wasting your time if you don't do this. But he really loved them. So it's kind of interesting because I think I talk about in the book, he seems to represent communities. You know, he represents that Greek community. He represents Australia now. He's, you know, all his life in Australia. And I think people in Japan think he's representing Japanese football as well. The way he's taken things from that game. He'll say it changed him as a coach as well. His experience there changed things. He came up with these, you know, the fullbacks and everything. It changed him and influenced him.
And again, I think a comment there, King Hoddle, regular view on the show. He says it's really impressive that he's managed to understand the local language in both Japan and Glasgow. Fascinating stuff, right? You have to say that, John. Really fascinating.
Yeah, he probably found it tougher in Glasgow because he was supposed to be speaking English. Although he had been there before. It was one of the great moments of my trip to Melbourne was sitting with Steve Blair, his old teammate at South Melbourne. He was a massive Celtic fan, and he says, "Oh, you know, I took Ange to Celtic Park." And I was like, "What?" And bear in mind, Ange is Celtic manager at this point when I've started writing the book. He was Celtic manager when I finished writing the book, but that's another story. I had to rewrite a bit. And he goes, "Yeah, I've got pictures of that." I'm like, "What?" So the next day I meet Steve, and he hands me these photos of a young Ange looking like a skinny Billy Connolly, young Billy Connolly, trying to squeeze into the turnstile, holding the European Cup. And you're like, and it's the first day they turned up, he couldn't get in. Could you imagine that? You know, it's like 20 years before he takes over as manager. They turn up, "No, we're not doing tours today, mate." You can't get in the door. It's like, couldn't make this stuff up. But yeah, he goes into Celtic. Listen, you won't be surprised to know it wasn't, despite what everyone says now, that they always believed in him.
Can I ask you, on that subject, John, I must ask you on that point, because this is one thing I'm going to go a little bit off key on, is that, can you tell us what you felt at the time upon him going to Celtic in terms of the reaction that got? Because the only reason I say that is that the reaction when Ange Postecoglou was linked with the Tottenham job, I mean, Jace will remember this. I think it's fair to say a lot of people were like, who? You know, how is this man even?
Let's be honest, you and me.
I think there was a lot of shock and surprise. How is this guy even in the running for the job? So I just wonder, you know, Celtic, again, in their own rights, they're a massive football club. I don't need to tell you that, John, you know that. How big a surprise was that not only was he in the running there, but he got the job? I wonder that from your perspective, how that came across at the time.
Well, you got to remember, Eddie Howe was getting the job. Everyone was absolutely certain that Eddie Howe was taking the job. Eddie Howe may well intended to take the job at some point, but something broke down because he wanted to bring, you know, 7 coaching staff, sports nutritionist, a pedicurist, whatever he wanted to bring. to Glasgow. It just didn't work. Maybe Eddie might have been stringing them along, looking for something better. Who knows? But for you spoke to people at Celtic, and they were convinced Eddie Howe was taking the job. So when you heard other names, you were like, "What's the point? Eddie's getting the job here." And you know, the Celtic fans were hyper excited by Eddie Howe coming in because it's the Premier League thing. They'd had Brendan Rodgers back there now, so there's this whole Premier League thing. Yeah,
I told someone who didn't want Eddie Howe in at Tottenham as well. We used to get messages. Give me anyone, but definitely don't give me Eddie Howe. Remember those, Rick?
I do.
But so there you go. I mean, like, there's not a Celtic fan now who would have said it hasn't worked out for them. It didn't work out for them. It was brilliant for them, you know, absolutely brilliant. But there was a lot of skepticism because when you're that second choice. And I liken it back to, I'm old enough to remember working the summer that Wim Jansen took over at Celtic. Bobby Robson was going to get the job. Now, it was doing a job at Barcelona at the time. Bobby was magic. You would phone him up and he'd be like, "Oh, I don't want to say anything about it, son. You know, I don't really want to say anything. But I will tell you, Celtic's a great club. It's a fantastic club." And he would go on for 5 minutes and give you all kinds of headlines. So everyone thought Bobby Robson was getting that job. It didn't work. Wim Jansen came in and it literally was, Wim who? Wim, this Dutch guy? I mean, he knew he, you know, was a great player and everything, but he again, another one had been working out in Japan. And, you know, he famously stops Rangers from getting 10 in a row. And he becomes this legend in Celtic coaching. So there was a little bit like that. Maybe older fans were like, well, maybe he'll turn out to be another Wim Jansen. Maybe he'll turn out to be. On the other hand, there were guys like, the way he was talking about football, they're like, that this could be like when Tony Mowbray was at Celtic. He went in there and it was like, we're going to play like, you know, this attacking and expansive football, and it just didn't work. You know, they got beat by St. Mirren and things like that. So there was a bit of trepidation about it. Let's put it that way.
But that's the thing, isn't it? He had difficult starts at Celtic, scrambled methods as players got used to his ways, criticism from the media, and there was a few high-profile defeats. But that, you're right, the game at Aberdeen, in the way that Aston Villa win for Poch turned things around with that late winner when Poch was early days. We'd lost at home to West Brom, lost at home to Stoke, had some really poor results, hadn't we? And that Villa turnaround, and Ange had that, didn't he, at the Aberdeen game?
Yeah, and I watched that game back probably when I was doing the book, and I thought, I want to watch this game back again. And I found it on Wisecout, got the full 90 minutes, and because my memory of it was fairly spot on. I kept thinking during the game, they keep working this ball at the edge of the box. They keep working this ball at the edge of the box. And it kept landing to Greg Taylor, left back. Again, you know, playing as the inverted fullback. Greg Taylor's not going to take one touch and stick it in the net. I'm like, at one point it's going to fall to Callum McGregor, who is good enough to do that. And that's where they were working. And they didn't change. As a colleague of mine says, you know, and they won a lot of late games and things like that. But they wouldn't win late games the way you or I would win late games, which is like, let's get the centre half up top and shell the ball on top of them. They win late games by just continually doing what they're doing, probing away, moving it round, knowing that chance is going to come.
Yeah,
and I think that was. Sorry, yeah, and that was. Ange himself said that game was big, not for anyone outside the club. It was big for getting the players to believe. They believed that, okay, if we keep doing this, we're going to win these games.
It reminds me so much, Johnny, who's talking.
I was going to say, Rick, the similarities to Poch in that respect of around the time of that Villa win, where was the meeting wasn't there, where the Adebayors, the Etienne Capoos were more or less outed, the Masons, the Townsends came in, and we had that little run, didn't we, of constant late, one late at Hull, one late at Swansea, one late at Leicester. You know, it's a very similar type of switch around, even in the Poch way, to that Postecoglou period.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing when John was talking there, what kind of really stood with me is the fact that, as John says, you know, you don't change your way. I mean, that Sheffield United game, the two late goals.
Yeah.
I mean, that Kulusevski goal. I mean, the fact that we played so calm in possession, where we're just banging whatever it was, like a 97th or 98th minute. It might have been later than that winner. it just kind of stands testament to the fact that, you know, you don't change your way. You keep on playing the same way. As John said there, you don't put the centre half right up top. You stick to the principles and stick to the belief. And again, you know, John, we spoke about there, as Jason said, the start he had at Celtic. I think, again, it's really important. I want to make this point. I think at Celtic, and correct me if I'm wrong here, John, I think it was 3 wins from the first 8. And I think they also crashed out the Champions League, right? So, I mean, I just wonder with fans at the time how they would have felt, because, you know, we talk about difficult start. Celtic fans, for me, are, you know, again, they want to see their team win. They want to see it done with a certain amount of style. So do you think even in the early stages, John, do you really feel the pressure, do you think, Postecoglou, given that early period at Celtic?
I think there was definitely pressure on him. There was pressure on the board. Whether he felt it or not is another issue, because he has such firm belief in what he's doing. You know, he must have done. This was, you know, he'd waited into his 50s to get a crack at the Champions League, to get a crack at British football, which was hugely important in his development as a kid and everything, his influences. And with all due respect, everyone knows that if you're going to manage in Scotland, you've got one eye on the Premier League then, haven't you? He's thinking, clearly I've gone there thinking, I crack this, I get a crack at a club like Spurs maybe. So yeah, he was under serious pressure there. Whether it ever got to the stage of anyone saying, oh, you got 2 games to save his career or not, these things are always said in retrospect, or nobody really knows that. Maybe 2-3 people know that one, you know.
One thing I will say about Celtic as well is we have a great thing down here. There's a lot of snobbery around the Premier League, and obviously all supporters think you're the biggest club in the world. But the Celtic job in many ways is harder than the Tottenham job. There's a lot more pressure because it's a 2-team league. Half the country seems to support one, and half the country, you go all around the world. They're a massive football club, Celtic, all around the world. And, you know, we look at us at the moment and we're thinking, well, can we get top? You have to win the league and you have to win both cups. It's simple. And if you lose one to Rangers, all hell breaks loose. And, you know, if you can imagine Tottenham finishing, you know, if we finish second in a season and got to a cup final, we think, well, shame we've missed the trophy, but that's enough to build on. That's a failure at Celtic, out the door. You know, the demands on the Celtic manager are far higher than the demands. It might be a different quality league, but the demands on Celtic or a Rangers manager much, much higher than they are on a Tottenham manager or an Arsenal manager or a West Ham manager or something like that. Huge demands.
And just the interest level, the media interest, I find it hard to explain to people, you know, having worked both sides of the border. You just constantly preview and then post-match and preview and post-match and preview and post-match. There's a massive intensity about it. If you've drawn a game, holy crap. When you see that next pre-match press conference, the questions are getting, you know, sharper about what went wrong and why has it gone wrong and what you're going to do to fix it. And because, you know, the press are reflecting a readership who are incredibly demanding. You're never more than 3 games away from a crisis. At Celtic, same at Rangers. You know, that's just the way it is. And, you know, it's not enough to do well as well. You have to make sure the other guy's doing badly. So you got to go and win those games. And he was great in the Old Firm games on the main part when they mattered. You know, he had a number on Rangers and had a way of seeing off Rangers managers, which is an inevitable byproduct. If you're successful with Celtic manager, you get the Rangers manager sacked and vice versa.
I mean, we've had 1 win at the Emirates in the Premier League, or 2 wins. Is it one at 1993? And this week was the anniversary of Eunice Kabul, isn't it? 13 years ago. And I know Celtic go to Ibrox twice, but the thought of a Celtic manager going 13 games without a single victory at Ibrox, I mean, you're gone. You've gone. You struggle to get 2 games at it and fail to do it. So it's a big job, the Celtic job, and we perhaps poo-poo Scottish football. We can take the mickey and we can laugh at the quality of it, but the prestige of the Celtic or Rangers managers are massive. They are massive jobs in football for sure.
Yeah, but, there's a whole challenge as well, because every team is so fired up to play it every time. It is so, and they are all, you know, I was talking to someone today who was saying, you know, the stats show it's the most set piece reliant league in Europe or something like, you know, they will get big guys, they will throw set pieces at you, they will play transition football really quick, hit on counter attack. There'll be pace and there'll be some size and they'll be in there. So you have to do the basics right. It's because we've seen it with many Celtic and Rangers manager, because we talk about the Old Firm game obviously settling that, but they inevitably get sacked because they go and lose at St Mirren or lose at Dundee United or Dundee or something like that, because it can happen. It's that kind of league. Nobody gives you anything, you know. Whatever you say about the quality, it's hard, it's physical, it's high tempo. You have to be really on it. You can't just slack off on the job and just expect to win.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Reading the book, you know, as I said, I drew the conclusion from it that when I simplified it earlier, as I said, when Ange gets criticised for those no plan B, it is, well, no, plan B is to do plan A even better. And there's a great quote in the book, which, bear this in mind, Manchester City away in 2 weeks' time and trips to Anfield and games like that. And I'll read you this quote. Ange says, "I take pride in the fact players have been brave enough to go out there against the best opposition, not fear conceding goals against good opposition, and potentially take some heavy defeats. I take strength from that in that if we improve, if we keep doing this, of playing games and creating opportunities, if we do that over a number of years, you will hit the sweet spot." And that's why I say you're going to have to wear a couple of defeats this year that are going to be hurt. And there's going to be huge criticism when they come of, why the hell have we gone to Manchester City and tried to go and have a high line with Dyer and Davis against Haaland and things like that? He's not changing. He's not going to say Dyer and Davis are playing and Haaland is, so we're going to be camped on the edge of our 6-yard box. It ain't happening, is it?
No, he's just not going to do that. I mean, he's not trying to lose. Everything he's doing here, he thinks is to win. But you hit that point about the playing it for years and hitting that sweet spot. He's trying to build something. He's trying to build a team. And his argument, I think I used the quote in the book, he was delivering a lecture to young coaches or to up-and-coming coaches. And he said, and he always says to young coaches, if you had a game this weekend and it decided whether or not you had a coaching career, right, the outcome of that game, what are you doing? Whatever your tactical plan is, that's your style. If you're playing Diego Simeone, hard to beat, working all over the place, pressing the life out of the opposition and trying to hit on the counter or hit goals and just playing that, says, that's brilliant. That's your philosophy, right? That's it. Stick with it. But if it's him, he's going out, like you say, he's going, no, playing high line because you need to play a high line because your press doesn't work if you have this massive gap. And if the press doesn't work, then nothing works. His argument always is, you saw this repeatedly at Celtic, actually. If there were games when they didn't move the ball so quickly and didn't really get on it quickly, he said, well, it's because our press wasn't right. He says, if we don't get the off-the-ball stuff right, the on-the-ball stuff doesn't follow. It's all part of it. It's all tied in. It's all to do where the players end up getting the ball then, right? If they're not pressing right, they're getting the ball in different positions, and it's harder to work and break your way through teams. So he won't change it. He won't change it.
I mean, I think as Jason kind of expels it, tells us there that, you know, the quote tells you whether we like it or not, or whether we approve it or not, whether we think it's naive or not. The intention will be an out front at the likes of City, at Anfield, etc. No pragmatism seems to be allowed, and it's a heavy defeat. So be it, John. Is that the message you would be telling in store?
You see it when Celtic goes to think about it. Celtic go to the Bernabeu front foot.
Yeah,
I mean that's, and we're worried about going to Manchester City saying we can't do that front foot. But Celtic go to the Bernabeu and play front foot football. They get killed.
What was it?
He doesn't change it.
What's the reaction was that like, John, from that game at the Bernabeu with Celtic? What was the reaction upon fans and media at the time? Can you remember?
Yeah, it was ultimately positive because they went out and had a go at it, and it was like you've seen enough teams, you know, go out there and we're just going to sit and get killed here, and we're just going to get murdered, and we're going to work really hard. And listen, some great Celtic teams have done it in the past as well, going out there at Barcelona famously and just, you know, we're going to work our arses off here and get a result. We're going to go and do these things. It's one way of doing it. Nobody expected anything different. By that stage, people were like, nah, what's Ange going to do? Is he going to park the bus? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Nobody expected.
But I just wondered.
Actually, Rick, if you think, and again, I'll go back to Poch. Remember when we went there, and that was the night he came out and played 2 up top in the Bernabeu. I think Llorente started that game, didn't he? And we were sitting there thinking, Jesus Christ, this is Real Madrid away, and we're going with 2, and we actually got a really good result out there, and then smashed them at Wembley, didn't we?
Yeah. But I just wonder. I mean, the question is, John, look, you've studied the man for many, many years. You've watched many of his games from different periods in his career. Obviously, his period at Tottenham as well. I just wonder, at any point, do fans look at what we're doing thinking, is this sustainable? Is this sustainable? We're aware of the fact that, it won't change. And as Jason has said, look, if you read that book, you'll see essentially that's his way. And if you don't like it, it's the highway, right? But do you think fans will continue to buy into that if you are still getting heavy cuffings when you go up the pyramid? And that's no disrespect. Look, from where he started to now, the Premier League, it is one of the most unforgiving leagues. Do you think, John, maybe putting the journalist hat back on, can you play that way, do you think, still?
I think so. I think you've got to understand, he's also at Spurs. I mean, grow a pair, guys, right? You're Spurs. He's not in Luton Town. You've got a budget. You've got players. He's better quality players than he's ever worked with. Why should he be frightened of Manchester City? It's not the gap between that and, as you point out, Spurs and Man City is not as big as Celtic and Real Madrid. This is what just man up about it. I mean, people listen. Like any manager, we decided by results. If you go and lose 10 on the spin or something like that, then yeah, that's what happens. But he's going to do it his way, and I don't see why not. He must be like a kid in a sweetie shop with the players that he's got to work with, even the guys you're talking about, right? And getting a bit worried about. To put this in perspective, there was never any chance of Cameron Carter-Vickers going back to Spurs, was there? Right?
Well, I hope you're going to tell me there wasn't.
No
respect to Cameron.
Must get that guy back. He was his best defender at Celtic. He's like a cheat code in Scottish football. So now he's working with guys that put him so far in the shade. He's just like, he must be loving this. Just loving it, the quality he's got. And this is all he's ever wanted, isn't it? He's wanted a shot. He's wanted a chance. He's wanted a team good enough to go and take on the very best and beat them. And he'll look at that, and despite losing Harry Kane at the start, I think he would look at it and say, well, yeah, look at that. A decent January window, why not?
Well, I think that's an interesting point where it brings us to now, kind of bringing up to date where we are at the moment. I've got to ask you what you've made of his start to life at Spurs. And, I mean, looking forward to the upcoming transfer window, the inevitable difficulties of dealing with Daniel Levy. Although, like I say, John, your focus is primarily on maybe the Scottish side of football. I know, again, you'll be well in tune with, obviously, England, and I'm sure well in tune with how much of a tough negotiator certainly Spurs chairman Daniel Levy is and has been during his time as chairman. I just wonder, do you think, are we likely to see Ange get his own players? Or even as fans, we don't believe they are, and it's not Daniel Levy backing him? Because I think we had a comment coming earlier to the show asking the question, do you think you'll see a Barney at some point between Daniel and Ange, and how you feel that relationship will play out?
I think Ange gets his players. That's it. It has to be that way. It just has to be. He's involved. He talks about shopping. It's like when his wife goes shopping for clothes. She knows what she wants. He knows what he wants. His way he's always looked at it, he's been very active in it, has been, this is what I need. I want this guy. Go get him for me. And that goes right back to South Melbourne days. He would take the general manager, he'd be on the phone, listen, you want to go to a game on Sunday? Yeah, no worries. And general manager go to the game, thinking he was just going as a mate. Let's have a beer and go watch this game. And then on the drive home, he'd be like, yeah, get me that left back. So he's been across it from the very start. I know it's bigger. Everything's bigger in the Premier League and the entire departments to work at it. He's also, he's got a great knowledge of the Japanese market, obviously. He's hammered that pretty effectively. As one of the recruitment guys I spoke to in the book said, he's just taking the piss with that. He's just like going, I'm having him and him and him. So wouldn't be surprised he went and did a couple of those. I wouldn't be surprised if he took, I don't know, maybe a Rio Hatate from Celtic, who I think he's just a Premier League player. He just is. We've seen players. When you go back to Virgil van Dijk when he was at Celtic, you're like, what's this guy doing here? You know. So then Hatate's another one you just got, or Victor Wanyama was one.
Yeah.
What's he doing? I mean, look at him. He can do everything. You know. So I think there's. Yeah, he'll get his guys. He's not going to be ridiculous with. Also, because he goes for character, I mean, he's not going to be going for Antoine Griezmann or something, is he? He's not going to be. He's not that. I don't think that appeals to him either. Or probably would, given he's a great player.
Yeah.
He's a brilliant Ange player. I've used the worst possible example there. He might be the ideal. If you go for Griezmann, that's what you should do. Just spend everything on Antoine.
He's not an ideal Daniel Levy signing, though.
No. But that's what Man United were talking about. That, weren't they? There was some chat about United spending all that money on Griezmann. But he's not stupid. He goes for characters. He goes for a bit of younger. He goes for interesting players that he can develop, and he goes for. I think he takes great delight in signing people that other people maybe wouldn't sign. They're like, oh, I'm not entirely sure about how good he is.
Mitoma was one that he liked, wasn't it?
Oh, what a player! What a player he is.
I just loved when he signed Maddison. As soon as he signed Jamie Maddison, I was like, oh, that is such an Ange signing. That was like, as soon as he said that, as soon as he went to Spurs, I was like, that's such an Ange move. It meant I had to go back and rewrite a few bits, but that's such an Ange move. It's a perfect club for him. And then when he signed Maddison, I was like, he's doing it his way. He's getting in his guys. He's getting the guys he wants because he's just a player that makes you smile, isn't he?
You know what I love about that Maddison signing is actually what he said to him in the build-up to that move, where, again, it's been quoted numerous places now that, look, whether you come here or not, you're going to see a different Tottenham next season. And I think that for every Spurs fan, I think that's what we wanted to hear, right? And again, Maddison seems to have been on that point, sold by him. Before I do pass over to Jason, I just have to ask the point, John, what you have made of his start at Spurs, given the fact that we've said on this show, on the numerous places that he's got into relative, difficult circumstances, and many would argue at Tottenham that was no different. He went into a summer where Spurs lost their talisman, their greatest ever goal scorer. It led to him appointing a new captain, 2 new vice captains. So again, what did you make of that start? And did it surprise you that Ange walked into what looked like a really difficult job on the face of things, and obviously started really, really well?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to make a habit of this. I mean, the fans were throwing crash barriers around at Celtic before he went in there, so he's kind of used to this thing. It was, that was, imagine stepping into that and to that whole Harry Kane thing. And will he go? Won't he go? Will he go? He handled that really well. He avoided becoming embroiled in a drama about that, which I just thought, how can you do that? How do you manage to negotiate that? And then you lose Harry Kane. I mean, I can't think of a bigger blow for a new manager going in. So I was fully expecting, like his other clubs, it's going to take time. He's going to, have a little bit of a hiccup at the start, and then they just kept winning, mate. It's like, I was thrilled for him, obviously, thrilled for the book as well. I think because he would say himself, he's improved everywhere he's been and every experience he's been through. It's almost like everything he goes into now, there's nothing that's going to surprise him. So you say, like, dealing with Daniel Levy, he's probably dealt with an awkward chairman before, dealing with this or dealing with that. There's nothing. He's at the age, he's nearer 60 than 50. He's been through life. He's worked in the real world. He's got all that experience. He's got that incredibly strong work ethic from the background. I don't think there's anything that's going to faze him.
No. And moving forward, I mean, what do you think Ange will achieve at Tottenham? What's his definition of success? Is it if I bring back that style and the fans are in the stadium happy, and I accept there's a little bit of a gap between us and the bigger teams, do I take that, or do I think, no, that's not enough for me? I want to get all the way to that position.
He will want to win the Premier League. He will want to win the Premier League. He'd love to win the Champions League. I'm sure that the FA Cup means loads to him as well, given for his background. And
that's all Ricky wants, the FA Cup.
Any trophy, John will take.
So, I mean, you've had a couple of League Cups. Come on.
Oh, well, listen, given this Jermaine Defoe story, even that might be taken away from us here. I know Jason's going to laugh at me for that. Even that will go. So Tottenham.
I got asked this again recently with someone, do you think they'll win? It's like, well, you just get used to the fact that Man City are going to set a ridiculous pace because they can buy absolutely everyone and then another guy on top of that to give Haaland a rest when he's tired. They'll just buy someone else in, you know. They can do whatever they want with the money. That's going to be really, really hard. But he'll want to win the Premier League. He'll want to, and it's one of the very first things his long-time assistant Peter Schlemovsky said to me. He says he believes he can be the best coach in the world. Okay, he says, and that comes from pain. That he's been through a lot of pain in his career, a lot of real knockbacks and setbacks and everything. And now that he's here, he's definitely not going to be saying, "Well, I'll just be happy to finish second or third and get everyone, you know, happy with the way we're playing." You know, he'll want to go and win that league, and we know how hard that is. With my journalist hat on, your observer's hat on, you go, geez, how do you see a way past Man City? Unless that Everton ruling is the beginning of something else that kind of resets the playing field, then you never know what's going to happen. Because let's face it, I mean, you talk about the bigger clubs. Who are the big? I mean, Chelsea spend £500 million and just make an absolute mess of it at times.
They might be with Manchester City anyway.
Yeah, it could be in there. I mean, do Liverpool have a much better model than Spurs, really? Yeah, my son's a Liverpool fan. He's always complaining about their signing policies. No, they won't sign him because he's over 21 years old. You know, it's like. So
I'm still waiting for the Premier League to investigate how Arsenal got promoted 118 years ago. You know, when are they going to get their 7,522 points deducted and everything stripped off of them? But I haven't got over that yet.
And I thought Rangers going bust was a complicated story up here.
Oh, I haven't got over that yet.
You know, I've got to say, John, I think for us, it's been a fascinating insight into the man and his methods. It would be great to have you back at the end of the season, just so we can get from your gauge whether you think he's met or he's on course to meet his own expectations.
I think he's on course, yeah, because he would have gone in there not knowing quite what. However sure he is, he's got to be, you know, you're in a new environment. You're going to be a little bit nervous, a little bit uncertain of what you're going to face, and he was probably prepared for a more difficult early spell than he had. So he's probably ahead of his schedule, but yeah, I think he's probably met his expectations, and I think his expectations will rise because he's a competitor. He's greedy. They all are. You know, like every manager's like, they all want 3 more players, right? Yep. Just 2-3 more players we need. They all want just that one more trophy, and he doesn't pretend that one more trophy or one more thing is gonna be enough. Like some of them kid themselves on, like, if I just win one more promotion or one more title or one more, that'll be enough. He's not. He's building something forever. He wants to build something that lasts. He would love to turn around and leave Spurs in a position where they're like the dominant team or the top team in the English Premier League.
Can I ask you just on this?
I just think reading it, you and even hearing what he's saying, despite the current scenario of players out and key players injured and things, and it is a big blow, but actually he'll quite relish it. He'll think that's an opportunity for something else to happen. That's an opportunity for me to force my ways down onto this player and get them to fully buy in. And if he buys in and then that player comes back, I've got 2 bought into the system, whereas at the moment it's all the doom and gloom. So he'll relish that, and that cultural set of I think even with the Kane thing, he thought in a quiet way, he probably thinks, yep, we'll miss the talent, but we will be able to press from the front, and it does let me change that leadership group, which we've seen with a real personality of Maddison come in, and the Dyer Højbjerg, you know, Kane, Lloris, that's all kind of died away, hasn't it? You've got the dynamics of Son. I think all those things have actually helped him. So rather than sitting there thinking, oh, it's all doom and gloom, he just takes the positive from every situation that he comes across.
Yeah, it's so interesting on that. I mean, one thing I do want to ask you, John, is before we do look to wrap things up, is are Spurs, in your opinion, you've spoken about the fact that Ange knows the journey that he's on in terms of where he wants to go, what he wants to do in his career. And it's, again, people might not thank me for asking you this question. Do you think he sees Spurs as a potential stepping stone for any other club? Or do you think for him now, he's reached the pinnacle? I'm really intrigued to ask you that.
Well, it's just difficult with it getting inside his head. I mean, he's getting on a bit. He's not as if he's, some 39-year-old looking for another life experience and going to La Liga or anything. The Liverpool pull was really strong on him, certainly growing up as a Liverpool fan. I don't think I'd be shocked if 2 years down the line he's done a great job at Spurs and Liverpool, and Klopp goes, then...
Cheers, John. It's been nice talking to you.
But it's not automatic. It's not like he's going to go there just because he was a Liverpool fan. He was a Happy Days fan. He had Fonzie poster as well. Once you work in football, it's a very different thing.
In 2 years, you can buy them for £1 in Poundland.
It'll be updated, and they'll be selling them to No, I think he's listen. I keep coming back to. He's like a kid in a candy store there, isn't he? But the quality of players he's working with.
Yes.
What's the difference between going there and going to Liverpool? What's the advantage? What are you going to get? I don't think anyone would see that. I don't think anyone can seriously go, well, it's a seriously bigger club or a seriously bigger budget or a seriously better playing squad or, he's in there for the challenge. He's in there for the interesting thing. If he gets support from in there, if he gets to instill what he wants to do, and you talk about bringing in players to kind of replace guys that are injured and missing and things like that. You got to remember the quality of these guys. The average Premier League, squad player is better than a lot of the guys he's ever worked with as well. He'd just be loving this.
Yeah. Listen, I do agree. I think, let's enjoy the man for as long as we've got him, that's for sure. Look, John, where can our wonderful viewers and listeners buy this wonderful book? Like I say, Christmas is coming, guys. It's a fantastic time to buy this now as a really good stocking filler. John, where can people buy the book?
Oh, with the usual all good bookshops, some bad ones, and Jeff Bezos' place, Amazon, seems to have a lot of them. And you can order them direct from Berlin as well. Berlin publishers, Berlin Pitch Publishing. So you just Google it, you'll find it. John, follow me at Johnny the Greek on Twitter, and I'll post the link regularly.
John, it's been an absolute pleasure. I must say, before you do go, we are giving opportunities to our viewers, listeners, one very lucky viewer listener, to get a free copy of the book. Jason has got the quiz question. Jace, let's hear the quiz question out. And I must say, for those that want to get involved with this, you just got to email us at our email address of lastwordonspurs@outlook.com. That's lastwordonspurs@outlook.com. Jace, I'm going to hand over to you for the question.
Well, I just seen that comment. So I was going to say, where will Jason spend his first night in Bangkok with Jan? So that might be the question. But actually, maybe that's not a good one to come up with. No, when Ange was approached to become the South Melbourne caretaker manager, what job was he doing and where was he at the time?
Jace, thank you so much. Just maybe give us one more time on that. So just that question one more time for viewers and listeners.
Yeah, we referred to it earlier in the show. When Ange was approached to become the South Melbourne caretaker manager, where was he working at the time? Brilliant.
Jace, thank you so much. Guys, if you know the answer to that question, email us in. And of course, that email address again, lastwordonspurs@outlook.com. That's lastwordonspurs@outlook.com. Jace, want to say thanks so much. If everyone knew the backstory to how we got this pod together, it's been a crazy last couple of weeks, right?
Well, I'll just say to Jan as well, I see you on the 29th of February, mate. So I'm flying out then. Yeah, it's been a tough week for all sorts of reasons, but you boys had a good night at Anfield. I'm sorry I wasn't there, but it became the traditional tough place to go under the lights, wasn't it? And we came away yet again without the main spoils.
We did.
We grabbed a creditable result, I think.
Absolutely. I think, look, many of us would have taken that before the night. So most certainly, Jace, thank you so much. John, been an absolute pleasure. Where can everybody keep their eye on what you're doing out there at the moment?
I'm working in Edinburgh at the moment. I've taken a gig doing a lot of reporting on Hibs, which is my son's team. So that has its difficulties. And you've got a 15-year-old Hibs season ticket holder in the house who has constant thoughts on what you should write about.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Look, John, the good news, it's already being bought on Amazon as we speak, which is great. Guys, keep up the purchasing. Great Christmas stocking filler. Look, John, been an absolute pleasure. We look forward to having you back on the show, hopefully with us at the end of the season. But from all of us here, guys, look, go and buy the book. It looks like it's going to be a great read over Christmas when who knows where Spurs will be. If you need faith in the project and what is to come, the book will tell you everything you need to know. But listen, from myself, from Jason, we've been the last one on Spurs. We urge you to keep safe, keep well, and as always,